On this episode of The Advance, I'm Brandon Waltens, and if you can believe it or not, Michael Quinn Sullivan hasn't been on a single episode of The Advance this entire year. Of course, this is also our first episode this year. That's okay. We're going to be talking about a few of the stories that we're looking at, not only this week, but actually as we begin this new year, 2026. We have a few storylines that Texas Scorecard is going to be following very, very closely that I want to talk about. One of those that is coming up now, on our last episode a couple of weeks ago, Michael and I talked quite a bit about the elections that we're going to be following here at Texas Scorecard. And a lot of that has to do with the races on the Republican side, right? Namely that Senate race, the Attorney General race, some of these congressional seats as well. But I think it's important to note as well, Democrats have their own fight brewing. Yes, you have mainly, I would say, the biggest fight on the Democrat side of things is going to be the race for who's going to take on the Republican nominee for Senate, whether that's John Cornyn, Ken Paxton, or Wesley Hunt. Democrats are going to be putting up their own candidate. James Tallarico entered that race early on last year as the favorite, coming in with the most name recognition of any of the candidates really that had entered at that point. But he was bested a little bit right before the filing deadline last month when Jasmine Crockett, a darling of the Democrat Party, maybe one of the leaders, you could say, of the Democrat Party these days, which isn't saying a lot, announced that she would not be running for re-election to the U.S. House, would instead be running for the Senate. Now, did she enter that race as the favorite? It remains to be seen. Right now, we're seeing some of the early signs of what actually that entry looks like from a practical perspective. Just days ago, you had James Tallarico announcing his fundraising total, announcing that he had raised, I think, I want to get this number correct for you. He had raised $7 million heading into this cycle for the Senate seat. $7 million. Certainly not a small amount. Now, what we don't know is how much of that Tallarico has already spent. These finance reports that we're going to start talking about, especially next week, are due in the middle of the month. They cover through the end of the year, so through December 31st, and we're going to have those on January 15th. Be able to look at who's raising the most money right now, who's struggling, and that should be able to tell us a little bit about these races. But right now, you have some of the candidates self-reporting, and so Tallarico says he's raised $7 million. Representative Jasmine Crockett hasn't announced yet whether she has beat that. She said that it was a record fundraising time for her, but hasn't gotten more specific. So we don't know whether or not she's entering this race with more or less money than her Democrat opponent, James Tallarico. But regardless of what happens there, who has more money coming in, it's sure to be a fight on the Democrat side of things, which could potentially work out in the favor of Republicans who don't want to see Democrats voting in their elections. Another storyline we've been following is, of course, the Republican Party of Texas's efforts to shut down primary elections, to close primary elections from Democrat interference. So as we know, the current state of things in Texas is that anybody on election day in the primary can show up to the polls and they can say, I want to vote in the Republican primary, or I want to vote in the Democrat primary. They say, I want to vote in the Republican primary. It doesn't matter if you are a raging Democrat. It doesn't matter if you've got, if you've still got a Kamala Harris yard sign in your front yard. It doesn't matter who you are. You can come in and you can vote in the Republican primary. You have your choice. And the way that a lot of other states operate, places like Florida and New York, for example, are that you at least have to register as a Republican, right? You can't just show up on the day and decide to vote in that primary election. And the reason a lot of this crossover happens is because in certain districts, legislative districts specifically, you might have a Republican-leaning area that's considered a Republican safe seat, and Democrats might cross over and vote in the Republican primaries in order to elect the more liberal or more moderate candidate. We've seen that happen numerous times, especially, by the way, during the last election cycle in 2024. No wonder why, then, the Republican Party of Texas and its delegates at the convention that same year voted to pass Rule 46, which closed the Republican primaries from Democrat influence. The problem, however, has been that the Secretary of State, who oversees administering elections in Texas, has said she's not going to do that. And so at the time for now, the idea of closed primaries in 2026 is effectively off the table, just from a practical perspective. We've got early voting here just starting in a matter of weeks. But the lawsuit still continues for Republicans with an eye towards 2028, especially. And the most recent development we've had in that, of course, the Republican Party of Texas has sued the Secretary of State, saying the Secretary of State needs to close the primaries like the Republican Party of Texas is asking for as a private association. You've had the Secretary of State say, no, they're not going to do that. Attorney General Ken Paxton has come in and actually sided with the party and not actually the state. So the Secretary of State has hired outside counsel. And the most recent filings that we have that we're going to have a story up about today at texasscorecard.com is the Secretary of State actually issued a reply on Christmas Eve was when that was due. Didn't get a lot of attention, but essentially is saying that, that the party doesn't have standing, that the case needs to be thrown out, that the Secretary of State essentially is pushing back and saying, no, the Secretary of State is not going to do this, not certainly going to do that during this election cycle. And so I mentioned those Democrat races, that big Democrat race between James Tallarico and Jasmine Crockett, that could potentially have the effect, at least for now, while primaries are still open in Texas, may have the effect of moving Democrat voters towards voting in their actual Democrat primary, especially if they want to see particularly one candidate, Tallarico or Crockett, above the other. So that could have the positive effect of moving attention towards those races for Democrats in a way, hopefully from meddling in some of these Republican races. It depends. We'll see what happens there. But those are a couple of the big stories we're going to be following. Another legal story that our own Travis Morgan has been following, is going to have a story up this week at Texas Scorecard about, deals with the Heartbeat Act. Remember the Heartbeat Act? This was passed actually not too long before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and we outlawed most abortion procedures here in Texas. The Heartbeat Act was a novel concept, a different sort of way of applying pro-life law in Texas. Essentially, it allowed private citizens to have a cause of action to sue abortionists who would perform abortions after a fetal heartbeat could be detected. And the most recent development we have here is a case that actually is in front of the Supreme Court of Texas right now, where you had one citizen who actually sued the Lilith Fund. Now, what is the Lilith Fund? The Lilith Fund is a Democrat leftist group that funds abortion and abortion travel for those who are trying to abort their children. And it's actually named after a demon, okay? It's actually named after an ancient demon that killed children. So a very suiting name, a very fitting name for this leftist organization. Well, you had one citizen who tried to go after the Lilith Fund for funding abortions in contradiction to the Heartbeat Act. And in turn, the Lilith Fund has actually been suing to try to overturn and have ruled unconstitutional the Texas Heartbeat Act. So even though we're now a few years removed away from the Supreme Court ruling that, states can indeed enforce their own abortion restrictions up to and including total bans on abortion, we still have the issue making its way through the Texas Supreme Court as well. So we're going to have a little bit of a follow-up on that as well this week from our own Travis Morgan. One other set of stories I do want to briefly mention without getting into too many specifics, because right now we've got our writers are looking into this. Aaron Anderson, who, as you know, has done an amazing job, especially over the last several years, of covering some of the bad apples, teachers who essentially have assaulted students or have been accused of assaulting students in classrooms across the state. We've covered hundreds of those stories. They've been up at Texas Scorecard. And some of the stories that we're receiving now as we're continuing to report on those stories, but we've also seen a troubling trend as well when it comes to special education in some districts in the state of Texas, where some special education students have been reportedly physically abused. You've had some districts that have said there's not a problem, but then they've gone and they've fired staff members clean out entire departments, and you still have citizens showing up to school board meetings saying that there is a problem. So this is something that certainly we're going to be looking at, especially as we look into this new year and look into education in the state of Texas. By the way, one last thing I will say, speaking of education, is that just a month from now, actually a little bit less than a month, right at the beginning of February, is going to be the date that Texas parents can begin applying for the state's new school choice program. There's been a lot of talk about that program, which schools will be able to receive it, which parents will be able to actually claim it. Right now, there's $1 billion allocated for it. So it's going to be essentially administered by the comptroller's office. Parents can apply. Not everybody, assuming that lots of families apply, not everybody will receive it. But those applications will begin in February as we begin the first school year this year with Texas's school choice program in place, which on day one will be the largest in the country. Part of that just based on the fact that Texas is, of course, the largest state in the country. So we're, of course, starting out with the largest program, but there are, of course, some issues that could potentially arise with that as well. Namely, something that has been discussed a lot over the last few weeks, whether or not schools that are affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, with the Council on American Islamic Relations, with the Chinese Communist Party, whether or not they will be entitled to receive those funds. Right now, the Attorney General has been asked to weigh in on that. We haven't I don't think we've seen a response yet from the Attorney General's office on that question that's been posed by Acting Comptroller Kelly Hancock. But once we do get that, that should hopefully shed some more light onto this program and what, if any, changes lawmakers will need to make whenever they return to the Texas State Capitol next year in 2027. So those are a few of the things we're looking at this week, this month, this year at Texas Scorecard. As always, you can follow us at texasscorecard.com. I'm Brandon Waltens. Thank you for joining us.